series. Today we've got Campbell Purvis from Autodidactic, a channel we dive into Tartaria, the mud floods, and he has many other subjects he covers on there. And some of what we'll talk about is in Australia, in Western Australia, in Perth, as a matter of fact. And he's going to give us a little update as well in regards to what is happening down in that region and what they're facing. And before I do that, I'm going to play his introduction video from his channel, and then we're going to meet Campbell. So here we go.
Hello and welcome. My name is Campbell and this is Autodidactic channel. And as always, autodidactic means to be self-educated, guys. And in this world you need to be self-educated. Otherwise you will believe the lies they are trying to tell us. And so that's what I like to do, is I like to look at history and the stories they tell us and just see if they add up. And the more you do this, the more you find that things just do not add up. So today I wanted to take a look at the Crystal Palace in London, England, that was built for the 1851 World's Fair. And here it is. Now, this is a monster. It's huge. You can see the size of this. And also notice these two very nice towers on each side. And this underneath, see all these archways? There's actually a train station underneath it. Now the train station is still there. This is, however, gone, unfortunately. So let's just have a bit of a look about the story we're told regarding the Crystal Palace, London, England in 1851.
Welcome to the show. We had a little funny glitch there with the mics, but we're here.
No worries. All right. Thanks for having me. Yes. Excuse me.
No problem. So, Campbell, we had a look at the Crystal Palace there, and that's in London. And your channel, you do a lot of dives into the Tartaria and in the mud floods. People may know or may not know out there, and may have seen Campbell. If not, go see Autodidactic channel, and you can dive right in with Campbell. But today, so yeah, give us a little insight about that and similar buildings that are in Australia.
Yeah. So what you just saw was the Crystal Palace, called the Crystal Palace, and it was built for the 1851 World's Expo in London. And the World's Expos were, they were held all around the world. I think they still have them. They were definitely up until the 70s. And basically it's where they were showing new technologies and things like that. And the Crystal Palace was there. The story is that it was actually moved to a new location at some point, and then it burnt down and made of glass. So it's an interesting story. So that's what I look into is history and basically alternative history, the stories that they tell us, which I call his story, and how they don't really match up with what we see when we go out and look at the world. And one of the main things we look at is the architecture. So with the World's Expos, they were in Australia, so there was one in Sydney, one in Melbourne, and one in Hobart, and we still have the main building in Melbourne, which is a monster as well. It's huge. And the story with these World Expos is that they were all built as temporary buildings, built in sort of 6 months or so, and they were, built to be knocked over basically after the expositions. But we have buildings all around the world, exposition buildings that are still standing over 100 years later, and they're quite clearly made of brick. They're not, these facades that they sort of tell us. So yeah, we find these anomalies all throughout the world. And of course, Australia, is being a new country, relatively new, is somewhere where the history really doesn't match up with what we're told, when you look at what's out there.
Yeah. So because of the World's Fairs things that you looked at all over the world, drew you in. You obviously, there was other things that you found, other buildings not related to the World's Fair, but similarities around the world from exploring different videos with you, watching what you've exposed. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So when you look at, many people call it Tartaria, and I sort of tend to say old world buildings. You'll notice many similarities. Just if you look at Capitol buildings around the world, like Washington Capitol building and all these state buildings, and they've got all the columns out the front and a big dome on top. They're always white and they're always the same design. And of course, we're told this is, Romanesque or Greco-Roman type architecture. But the truth is, this is a worldwide, it's worldwide. We find these buildings in South America, in Brazil, in, third world countries, in Asia, definitely in Australia. And there's definitely different types of buildings, but the giveaways are the big domes, the columns. A lot of them are oversized, very, very large buildings with, huge doorways, and you get inside them. I think New York railway station and also the Vatican, when you look inside those buildings, people literally look like ants. They look like ants inside these buildings. And all these buildings, we're told, were built basically 1750s to the 1900s. And they all seem to have been built when there was no populations, when there was no money, everyone was broke, living in the mud. There was no technology, there was no roads a lot of the time, and we have photos. We have all the photos of these buildings, these huge buildings, and there's no roads. They're just in the middle of, nowhere. So if there's no roads, how do they get the materials there to build this building? And so this is what we look at, these stories that we're given, and it doesn't take a lot of looking. I guess the main thing is really to just get past what we've been told. But once you get past that, it's pretty obvious that we're being told misinformation, shall we say?
Yes.
And in Australia found. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say that when you were talking about seeing the different buildings and finding them in different places around the world, when I started following your channel, I was always a skeptic, as we talked about off air, but that really opened my mind to is way too coincidental that all these buildings are so similar, not only in structure and design, but statues and the carvings and the intricacies that you show so clearly to everyone.
Yeah, definitely. The facades, the face ads, as we call them, and there seems to be two types. We get the old world buildings that look really, they just look well done, and they look, very sophisticated and, not gaudy, that they're just, just nice. And then we get these other buildings that are what I call gaudy, that they've got gargoyles coming out of them, and they've got stuff all over them, and, evil faces and all this kind of stuff, which is what we're terming Venetian. And that's basically from what we can tell, that's just a facade, and it's to change the looks of these buildings. And it's something that they do a lot. Is you'll find, like in Australia, I'm in Perth, and they cover all these old stone buildings in sandstone, and so that gives all the buildings in Perth this kind of look. And if you go somewhere else, you'll find the exact same buildings, but they may paint them all white, or they may cover them in Europe and England. They use rock a lot to cover them, and they just put these different facades on them. But we've got the photos. When the facade falls off, they're all red brick underneath. All these buildings, all of them, they're made from red brick. And this is another question: is the red brick? Where did this red brick come from? Yeah, exactly. you know, in Australia, we've got all these buildings, and when you look into where did the clay come from, where did the bricks come from, you literally get like these, you know, little two-man operations, you know, in a hole in the ground that they could put a fire in and apparently making the bricks. And then you think, hang on, you know, you kind of need about 100 million bricks to build the buildings you've just said you've built.
Yeah.
Where'd they come from? And all over the world, same bricks. And these bricks as well, we find in old buildings like Sodom and Gomorrah, red brick. They have red brick structures, and they're completely destroyed now. And so, yeah, all the old buildings like Uruk, you know, out in the Middle East, they're all red brick buildings. And so they're made from the same stuff as what we're told are buildings that were built thousands and thousands of years later.
Yeah, exactly. And there was something I had on that note. I was trying to save it. Geez, ran away. That's okay. So before we dive into some things that I wanted to have you look about and we'll banter and chat about, can you give us an update about what's going on, what measures you've been facing? We hear all kinds of alarming things up here, and probably most of that has to do with Sydney and that Australian area, and Europe and Western Australia. So yeah, let us know what's going on around the continent, what you can.
Yeah, yep. Like I said, I'm in Perth, so we're the most isolated city in the world. We're sort of right on the other side of the country. You know, sort of you know, a week's drive from Melbourne, Sydney. But in Melbourne and Sydney, obviously, most of the footage you would have seen is Victoria, Melbourne and Victoria, where they're having severe lockdowns, obviously. And if you look at the stats, obviously very questionable. And so obviously they've been having a lot of protests. People have been standing up. But the reality is in Melbourne is there are still, you know, the majority of people still believe that there's a beer virus that's out to get them. And so you know, seriously, most of the people there, they're for the lockdown. They want the lockdown. And obviously, you know, they're like 8 months into a 2-week lockdown, and you've got to. So that's the biggest problem. In New Zealand, they just re-elected their Prime Minister. And this is the lady who 6 weeks ago came out and said, we're building COVID camps. We're going to lock people up indefinitely. Basically, unless they comply, you won't get out. And they voted her back in. So this is the main problem that we face, really, is, you know, just, you know, people believing the MSN, isn't it, really? The mindset and just this whole story. And it's interesting because when we look at buildings, this is how they disguise the past, is with facades. You know, they always put this different face on it. It's exactly what they do with the media. It's the exact same thing. So, yeah, they just give you a different view, and people are believing it. And we've seen it in America too. You know, recently with the elections, you know, just all the censorship, you know, there's only one version of information allowed out, and unfortunately, if you sit there and that's the only place you get your information, we have a problem, Houston.
Yeah. And on that note, well, it's funny because when you think in the big terms of all the censorship going on, and everybody, if you don't know, they're censoring me and they're censoring Campbell. So if they're worried about us, geez, it must be bad out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I'm still a little fish, really, compared to YouTube. Yeah, in Melbourne, I don't know if you saw it, but people were getting arrested for posting on Facebook. One lady was a pregnant lady in front of her children, you know, like 3-4-year-old children. Cops busted in, arrested her, and took her away. Another guy had his door kicked in, like, you know, by cops. Same thing for posting. And so this is what they're doing, is it's fear-based. So when the reason they did that, and the reason that it was so publicized, is that was just a message. Don't try and organize anything against this. Don't try and organize protests. Don't do anything like that, because we'll kick your door in and we'll drag you out in front of your family. And so this is what they're doing. It's not that they wanted to necessarily silence those people, because then they just released them. You know, none of them got they just did this big thing, put it all over the news, and the people actually just got released. So it's all fear, and this is, this is why the black box, that they'd like to tell you is the smart TV, but when I was growing up, it was called the idiot box. That's their biggest weapon.
Yeah, it is. It truly
screen
is.
In the corner.
Yeah, very much so. And very interesting. I didn't know about the severity of them engaging with people, so to speak, in the extreme fashion you just described, although they are doing similar things here in Canada. And I've heard different reports, and I don't know if you have, that some of this is government instigated, like you're indicating, like to create the fear, but they're doing it and it's all a setup to scare everybody. Have you heard similar stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. There's in Melbourne that there's suddenly all the police uniform. Well, there's two types of police. They've still got their sort of normal police, and then there's these what we're calling robo-cops that come in there in full black. They look like, I don't know, some futuristic cop. They've got an Australian flag on their arm that is black. Instead of blue, it's black. They don't have any badges saying that they're police. And these guys, and they've got helmets, riot gear, and they just come in and start smacking people. They just come in and they just go in and beat people up and drag them away, and quite severely. They got one guy who was mentally handicapped sort of 2 or 3 weeks ago. He got caught on film, and there was like 7 of them around him, and one of them just walked up and booted this guy in the head for no reason. And this is the thing. This is all under the guise of the beer virus. And what are they saying? Got a social distance. Got a social distance, right? So that's why you can't demonstrate unless Black Lives Peaceful. So what happens? The police go out there and they jump all together, get as close as they can to people, and throw them and beat them up. How is that social distancing? And this just shows you it's got nothing to do at all with health, nothing to do with medical, anything, any V word. This is to do with fear and compliance. And Melbourne is a testing ground.
Yes.
Melbourne's a testing ground. They're seeing how far they can push people, and no doubt some places in Canada as well. Definitely New Zealand. And they're the testing grounds. What's it going to take to get these people to comply? Can we get them to comply? And I guess once they figure it out, they want to roll it out to the rest of the world. And this is serious, guys. They really do. Dan Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, he's a communist. He's literally in bed with the Chinese Communist Party. We've got all the documentation. He's been to China so many times. He goes to all the communist rallies and meetings, and he's such good friends that he even sold 20% of the port of Melbourne to the Chinese Communist Party. And
sounds like our guy. Sounds
right.
like Trudeau.
And
sounds like Trudeau Canada.
Trudeau.
He's terrible. Yeah,
I heard his dad wasn't much better. And this is the thing, they're all bloodline families. Our police in Australia, they are all Freemason families. Like, if unless you're just a grunt, if you have any kind of authority at all, you're a Freemason. But, that's all true too. So it's probably the same everywhere. They say all this thing about bloodlines, and they kind of, when it comes out, they want you to think, oh, no, it's just the kings and the queens and these people right up the top, that you'll never meet and never been involved with. Nah. Yeah. These bloodlines, they go right through all these systems of control. All bloodline people all come from the same, batch, whatever it was, the infected batch.
Yep. Exactly. Well, I'm going to pull up, let's see, what do I got to share screen here. Bear with me, everybody, while we move along here. And thanks, Campbell, for the update there and a little insight in what's going on in your area. And it's not much different here in Canada. It's well, the harshness is a little less at right now, but they're threatening it big time, and I don't know how far it has to go to wake people up is what is just beyond me.
It's just bizarre, isn't it? I can only put it down to the fact that people, all they're doing is watching the telly and they're listening to that, don't look at any other information. It's all conspiracy theorists. Has to be fact checked.
Yeah, exactly. So I just got it to come up there and came back to us. That is our legislative buildings in Victoria, British Columbia. And I wasn't sure if you'd done a dive. I looked, but I didn't see. I know you'd done buildings in Canada out east, the Parliament buildings, and you did the hotel, correct, in Quebec City.
Oh, yeah.
But I wasn't sure. Have you done any other buildings
well.
in the Vancouver?
No, I think I've pretty much done. No, I've just done sort of Quebec and the Parliament building with the library. Is it the Library of Congress? They've got this library that's just ridiculous. It's next to the old. And the Parliament building too. We've got photos of that with nothing around it when it was supposed to have been built. No roads, no nothing. It's just sitting there by itself.
Exactly. And I really liked that deep dive that you did on the Canada episode, of course, as well as all the episodes you do. It's so fascinating, and then you start putting the pieces together. When you start looking around the world, and if anybody can watch through them all and not go, I'd be surprised.
Well, this is one thing that's, I guess, makes it a bit easier. This sort of topic is because most people can go into their town or city and they can see these buildings. They can see exactly what I'm talking about. They can see all the architecture. They can read the stories. About when they were built and how they were built, and this is another thing we find is you find these huge buildings, and they say they were built, and then they knock them over like 10 years later, 20 years later, and these are huge, and some of them are like 10-story buildings, and just whacked them up, had no money, no people, and then they knocked them over. So it's just really a story to cover up. They're just covering up that our past was actually a lot different than we've been told.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull this up here, Campbell, and then we can have a closer look at the Victoria building there. And I'm sure you'll find it. Let me see. I get this screen fascinating because a lot of the buildings that you look at have these dome tops and what, if you want to call it, spire and the statue. I mean, so many of them around the world are exactly the same with these things.
Yep.
And you'll see. Go ahead.
Sorry, you go.
Oh no, I was just meaning like some of the architecture is got the same. I'm sorry, Campbell. Whatever the alignment of everything, like you say, in different buildings, it's all so perfect. And I'll let you go now.
Yeah. The symmetry. If you look at the windows, they're all completely the same shape, same size, and on top of each other, and you see it. Now this one, if you look at the bottom story, you'll see these little sort of window things right
along the bottom, right there, going right into the ground.
Yep, exactly. Yep, you can see them on those sort of end ones. So they go into the ground, and if you look at the size of those windows, just there, they're the same width as the ones on top of them. And so what it is, they're actually windows, and we have photos. Those. So nice, going into the ground. So we have photos of buildings where they've excavated, and those windows keep going under the ground. And we've found, we found like stories under the ground that still have glass in the windows, and they have doorways. So that's what we are calling, we term that the mud flood, because it looks like at some point in history, something has happened, and a lot of land has come across, like there's been some kind of mud flood, and it's buried buildings. And so that's why you see on all these old buildings, you'll see stairs going up to the front door, and you'll see these windows along the ground going down into the ground. And that's a very familiar feature of these old world buildings. And that's also sort of a clue to the fact that they're actually a lot older than we're told. They were sitting there, because we have all these stories, but why would you build, whole levels underground? And we're talking levels. We're not talking, a basement under a house. We're talking these kind of buildings. I did a video on the Louvre, and I think that that had about 6 stories underneath it, under the ground, all with windows and doors everywhere. So yeah. The other thing is those domes. As you can see, they're all copper. And on the front there, right there, you can see we've got a big one in the middle, and we've got one on each side. Now, those ones on each side, you'll find there's 2 at the back exactly the same. So there's actually 1 dome in the middle and 4 around. And you can see, just there, you can see that there's a dome in the middle there as well on those end ones.
Over here, you mean?
And there'll be 4. Just back, there. So those 2 domes, you can see there's a bit rising up in the middle there. Maybe they took it off. But basically, we always find it's 4 small domes around the outside and 1 big dome in the middle. And we like that. So we see that everywhere. It's just everywhere. And when you look at the tops of those domes, or the tops, if you join them all up, you get a pyramid. So this, as far as we can tell, these weren't just all put everywhere just because they look nice and they, take lots and lots of upkeep. We think that they were basically these, what we're terming antiquitech. They're technology that were drawing energy from the ether. So basically free energy. We have pictures of these domes with, all the wiring inside them, with ground. They've been grounded, and and they've all got the same thing. So it looks like in the past, apart from the fact that they could build these buildings, and they're still standing so much longer and they're still perfect, they were actually built to run themselves. They had energy in them that ran the buildings. There you can see that one there. See the 2 domes on the side and the one in the middle. So if you got an aerial shot of that, you'd see those 2 smaller domes. There'd be 2 more on the back. And you just see it everywhere. And those portals, see those round windows, the portals, we see them everywhere. And also that shape up on the top of the dome looks kind of like a rotunda or a bandstand. They're on the top of every dome. And we think they're working. We're still working out how it all works, but it seems that they were using mercury and copper to create magnetic fields, and basically drawing the energy through spires or antennas and down through those buildings, which were some kind of capacitor, or they were amplifying the signal down. And then we find wires and copper strapping all through the buildings, leading down to the ground. And many of them have wells, wells. We all know wells, but wells seem to be something different to what we're told they were. And this is what we find. We have all these things and we're given these explanations of what they were. But when we look into it, we're starting to realize that the actual function of them was something completely different. And there's quite a bit of evidence that they were using wells and water as batteries somehow to store the energy. We're not sure how they did that, but we've got all the schematics, we've got plans, we've got photos of buildings with all the wires going down into these wells, into the water. So, they were definitely doing stuff. Their technology was different to what we know. They weren't using microchips and circuit boards and things. Well, at least not on the scale we are. That's kind of another topic.
So what do you think, Campbell? I mean, I could try and pull up different pictures of construction and stuff, but I mean, they're saying they started this in 1893, what we were just looking at there, and finished in 1897. They built that in 4 years. And when you look at historical pictures, okay, because really civilization here, it was all over in Vancouver. This is on Vancouver Island. Now, when all the population is on the mainland, why would you go build that over on an island and there's no population that needs it yet?
Exactly. That's that's another big question. Is if you're building, starting out a civilization or a city or something, why would you put all your resources, and we're talking manpower and physical materials, into building buildings like this, which are clearly oversized, which are clearly too big for the population? And when you do that, you're taking all your resources away from infrastructure, from roads, from warehousing, from housing, from all this other stuff. So the narrative just doesn't make sense. And as far as building on an island, you've just got to sort of ask yourself, how did they get all the materials across there? And you've got to think they've got to get them to the shore first, then across the water, then across that island to the work site. Are there big roads there? Are there train? And this is what we find is there's nothing there but the buildings, and the buildings are half in the ground, like they seem to be sunk. And as far just a bit on that topic is, why is everything in history, and we're taught it so much that we just don't even question it. Everything to do with history is buried. Why is it all buried? That when you think about it, it doesn't make sense, because it's not like over time the land rises level. It doesn't do that, because if it did, we would see that, literally in the new cities and new buildings. But we don't see that because, they sort of talk about these civilizations that weren't that long ago, and they give us these stories that just don't make sense about them. And like you said, Canada's a fairly, it's not old like Europe, so small populations, and another thing is you can't find any designs for these buildings.
Exactly.
And we've had a lot of people searching, and we have searched just for something with measurements on it, just for some kind of schematic or, anything. And all you can find is drawings of the completed buildings and sometimes drawings of the floor plan. And that's it. No measurements, no elevations, nothing to do with, and when you look at buildings like this, we're talking, you need civil engineers in there. You don't just whack these up and hope that they don't fall over. These are huge constructions. They're huge.
Yeah.
And what kind of tools did they have back in, 1890? Okay, what kind of tools? There's no cars. They may have had some very early steam machinery, but that's once they got it to the site. So everything you see in that building, they had to drag there by horse and cart, everything. And, you've got to ask, where did all the copper come from? Who made those domes? Who made all the glass for those windows? Where's the glass factories? Where did it come from? Exactly. Who made all the statues? Where are all these artisans?
Mm-hmm.
And this is, and if you build something like this, wouldn't you want to stamp your name all over it? Because look at that. That's just amazing. Mm-hmm. If you were the architect, wouldn't you want the whole world to know that you built that? And here's proof that I built it. Here's the plans. Here's the photos. I built that. But nothing.
Exactly.
And most of the architects, nothing. And most of the architects, they have competitions. They're like, we're going to build a building, and they have a competition. Everyone enter, and then they pick someone, and that's it.
Exactly. Well, and then you think of the times, like you just said, describing the building, and there's so many other things. And, they were struggling to build what was in Vancouver at the time, and why they would decide to put our legislative assembly for the province over there. is just ridiculous. That it doesn't make any sense when you stop and look at it. And then you think, like you talked about resources. So everybody's starving, living in mud huts and whatever, and what you see in other footage. But somehow somebody's got the time to do this because they've got so much time for that statue on top of the spire and top of the whole building. It's just, on and on the questions start to grow.
They do. How did they get that angel up there? Look at how many stories is that? That's what, 8 stories, 9 stories, and they're big stories. How did they get that angel up there in the 1890s? They have some super crane? I mean, This is the thing. Because if they had a crane, who built the crane? Where did all that iron come from? Because the crane has lots of parts to it.
Oh, yeah.
This is like, it's like when you really start asking and fairly simple questions, the whole story just falls apart. It just falls apart. And you mentioned the wood. Now, when you move into a new city, or into a new area, and you're going to build a town, and we claim this, it's whatever, Vancouver, let's start building. What you've got is trees. What's easy to make is axes. Mm-hmm. So you would be making things out of wood. Apart from the fact that when you build a city, you actually need to clear those trees. Mm-hmm. So part of the process of doing that is you're collecting the material that you can then build with. But no, they just throw all that away, and they somehow build industry. I mean, because looking at that building, just think of the industries that you need to build that building. And how long was it? 3 years? That's 4. That's pretty good. They don't build buildings like that. 4 years, yeah. They don't build buildings like that. And there are some buildings that have been built recently that are that big, and these things take 10, 20 years, and that's with all the modern machinery.
Exactly.
It comes down to the plaster inside the building. It's everything.
Well, that's what I find, Campbell, like as I watched from and started looking because of watching your channel, in the fact of look for the construction materials, look for the construction facilities, because where the heck are they getting all the materials, that especially the brick, and different facings and the marble and all these different things when everybody's starving, living in mud huts.
Exactly, and this is it, they're all immigrants, like you say, they're all immigrants starving, the poor from Europe pretty much, but when they hit the shores of Canada, they suddenly metamorphosize into super architects and artisans and builders, and there's suddenly all these different people.
I mean, I'm not sure which section this is on, but it's in the same thing. But I mean, if they could carve this, a little more than 100 years ago, or however, like what was it, a chisel? Like, I mean, come on. Why aren't they doing it today? And I've questioned that to many, many people, and they go cost. And I go, cost? Well, what would it cost then? People were starving.
Yeah, but I mean, realistically, what's the cost? Back then, it's some guy, we're told, with a hammer and chisel, chiseling away. Today, it would be some guy with a hammer and chisel. The only cost is time and $10 for a hammer and chisel, And what's missing is the skill. What's missing is the fact that they can actually do it. And if these are stone or marble, just look at the bottom of his dress or his tunic. See that little fold in that tunic? Down there, right there. Yep. You look at that. That's been hollowed out from the inside. Now, when you're doing that, one wrong hit, because look how thin it is, one wrong hit, broken.
Yes.
Broken. There goes your statue. What do you... Because they can't pull out a grinder and like smooth off the edges and try and do over it. And you think, look at the faces. You see these perfect faces. Are you telling me every single time no one did a mishit? No one, took a chunk out? So we just don't know how these were made. There's ideas. Were they 3D printed? There is stories that there was another product called faux faux marble that you
Mhm.
could carve and that went hard over time.
Okay.
It's a bit hard to find info on it. Yeah, and that makes sense. And I've read a bit about that. It's hard to find info on it. And now, of course, and they do this so often, now they've released something called faux marble. So if you try and search for the old stuff, you just get all this stuff, you know, and they do this all the time. Like, it's like El Dorado, you know, the city of gold. If you do a search for that, all you'll get is Disney movies. And so they do this all the time to sort of hide what people are looking for and make it hard to get information. Look at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Ceiling.
Look at this. There's the ceiling. Everybody's starving. They're living over on the mainland, and they're doing this on an island where there's no population yet, or very, very little.
Yeah. So who's going to see that?
Exactly.
You know, what are you like? Come on, everyone, come in, quick! Everyone, look at the ceiling. It's like, so. And when you just see, you know, everything's just so perfect, and all those paintings, you know, it's like the Sistine Chapel as well, of that story of, what was it, Michelangelo lying flat on his back for 5 years or something.
Yeah, right.
Just, I mean, see that? I mean, if you just look at that shot, I mean, you're looking at what? How many different industries just to create that, and how many different artisans and skills and all this stuff just for that little shot. You know, you've got glass, you've got the windows, you've got lead, you've got all the architraves, plaster, the artisans, the paints, everything, and then down to the molds of making those, you know, the bits they've got on the wall there. It's just, then you've got to get them up there, you've got to place them there, you need all the machinery in it. It's just,
so these ones here
done so perfectly. Like,
these ones here, Campbell, do you think those are the bronze, or you mentioned a metal? Is that what these are, do you think?
I'm trying to look at what that perspective is. Is that the bottom of the dome and it sort of goes upwards? Because they may be portals.
Here, I'll back out of it. We're looking straight up, and I zoomed in here on this up piece of the upper arch here.
Oh, to that. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah.
Kind of looks like a flowery decoration, something, and I was wondering if that's some kind of a metal or something that they've placed there. But either like you say, all the different industries that we would see today in trades of the carpentry, and then you've got your carving, you know, and finishing people and all this decorative stuff. For what? The people aren't going to be here for 100-something years.
Exactly. But that, so what you find underneath those domes, if you had a picture of the floor, you would have tiles in geometric patterns. You find these all the time underneath those domes, and it's actually called a portico. So even on the inside, under those domes, the space under the dome down to the floor is called a portico as well.
Okay. I didn't know that. Portico, what is portico relevant to, or is that got anything to do with
portico,
some places you see?
Portico has got a lot of meanings. So under the triangles you see on the top of buildings, you know, above the pillars, they're actually called porticos as well. And that statue you just showed, that bit that he's sitting in, the sort of recessed bit, that recessed bit, that's also called a portico. But you can kind of see on that above his head it's half a dome. So it is that one's the same kind of. So portico's got something to do with, as far as we can work, it's being underneath that shape. But they also call the triangles porticos, which is, you know, they like to confuse language, I think. But the word port is obviously through you know, portal, and then you've got port as in the ocean, boats, maritime law.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so underneath that dome.
Sorry, go ahead.
Also, I was going to say, underneath that dome, it's, as far as we can tell, it's all to do with drawing energy down, and the fractal, like the geometric patterns on the ground, are something to do with it. So it's some kind of, I don't know, energy or healing. The cathedrals seem to be, some kind of healing device. But those domes, we're not sure. They're some kind of energy device, but there's definitely something to do with the space under the domes.
Well, on that note, Campbell, not only from your channel and other people doing the same or similar work that you're doing, and then other channels that are sort of offshoots in a different direction, but I've been hearing more and more of this lately, that the spire and coming down through the center and all these different constructed facilities like these things that you look at, and then there's others that are different kind of structures with similar kind of internal sort of setup or construction, and everybody's now talking about that it's looking like these were energy collection facilities, or at least for maybe that building, and maybe provided power, like and I would assume that might be referencing what Tesla discovered, and potentially is what been hidden from us, where you're drawing the energy from the atmosphere because it is electrified, and that's how we transmit everything the way we do right now.
Yep. Yes, that we're terming that antiquitech. So, you know, it sort of came out of cathedrals, is where it started. We were looking at cathedrals, and we realized that they all have, you know, the stained glass windows, and they all have a big round stained glass window with a cymatic pattern in it. Now, cymatics, if you don't know, is they're geometric shapes that you get that are attached to frequency. So when you change frequency, you get different patterns, and you can see this in, you know, frozen water, and they put, you know, rice on drums and things like that. So these windows had cymatic patterns in them, and there's a lady, I've forgotten her name. She went out and she went into cathedrals and she recorded the silence. And she had this technique where then she played what she'd recorded, and then in the cathedral, and then make a second recording. And she did this 7 times, and she ended up with a frequency. And when she played this frequency, it matched the windows in the cathedrals. So, and of course, and of course, cathedrals have organs. Well, they used to have organs. They've ripped most of them out, right? Mm-hmm. These massive pipe organs. So what do we have in our chest? Organs, right? So, and of course you have the choirs. So it's got a lot to do with sound and energy. And of course, that's what cymatics is, right? It's just the representation of a frequency. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of where it all started from. And as far as we can tell, these were healing devices. This is where you went to get healed, or, you know, just to boost your energy or whatever. Yep. Mm-hmm. And of course, cathedrals have some of the tallest spires that we see, going straight up into the air. They all have their little antennas on top of them. A lot of them have been turned into crosses, but they weren't originally. And yeah, it's proven if you put something way up in the atmosphere, it's free energy. The higher it goes, the more energy you can draw down. And as you mentioned, Tesla was into this with Wardenclyffe, the Wardenclyffe Tower that he built. Was it New York for?
I believe so.
JP Morgan. Of course, when Morgan found out that it was going to be free energy, well, the story goes, he knocked it over. But that's the same concept. Is he was the Wardenclyffe Tower? He was drawing energy from the ether, from the atmosphere, and just channeling it down. And so this is what we think they were doing, because the technology is actually proven. It's out there. It's been done. And so what it looks like, you know, as you said, it looks like every building was built. You know, so when they built a building, they looked at it and they said, what does it need to be perfect? We want this building to stand for 1,000 years, and in 1,000 years, we want it to be just as usable, just as, you know, relatable as it is now. And that's what they did. What do we do today? We just throw up crap in, you know, 5 minutes and then knock it over again. So they built things to last. So they all seem to come with their own energy. And this has got to do with lots of stuff. You know, they were self-heated, these things. If you look into the big sweeping stairways that you see down, you know, in the foyers, the big, you know, curved stairways and all this, they're actually part of a heating system. And these buildings were designed so that the heat was taken up to the top of the buildings, and then it flowed down, like literally down the stairways and that's how they directed it. So it's like every single part of these buildings is just designed perfectly. And Fireplaces is another one that we've looked into. They don't seem to be made to burn wood in, because the fireplace is pretty much the most inefficient thing you can do anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
They're ridiculous. All you do is waste trees and heat. Yeah, so they weren't originally, we found photos of fireplaces, and they have big, look like big metal sheets in there at the back of them. And at the front, they have these two poles or two, ornaments of some kind. And of course, twin poles, right? Boaz and Joaquin. But that's also to do with energy, poles, north-south pole, electric pole. It's all the same thing.
Yeah.
So they seem to have had free energy. We also find tram systems that they have again ripped out, but we've got old footage. We've even got footage of these trams going around, and there's no wires. They're not connected. There's no wires above them. And then you see footage 10 years after that, and they're being drawn along by horses. So what happened? What happened there?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is also, in something you mentioned there, I've been hearing a lot more about how many things are connected to frequency, and I've always been in tune to that in a way, in personally health and many things are frequency, and being a musician, as I told you. But applying it and understanding in much greater way and how it applied to these buildings and different things where they were using them in these what we would call advanced ways that we're sort of just getting back to, if you will.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, gosh, now I've lost what you said. What did you just?
Well, yeah, that's all right. I did give a long little speech there, but it's more about that. I've been hearing a lot more from different sources of how frequency has played a role into different things in our lives, in our constructions and buildings and such, and that we're almost to a stage where we're just getting back to it now.
Yes. So frequency, I mean, depending on your beliefs, we're all energy at frequency.
That's right.
Everything is. You can see videos and they'll use frequency and iron filings and literally build buildings for you, like on the ground. So yeah, frequency was a major part of the old society. Now in the 1940s, they changed, you would know this being a musician, they changed, what is it, base C from 432 to 440.
Yeah.
And of course, if you know anything about numbers, 4 plus 3 plus 2 equals 9. 9's the God number. So they changed that to 440. So they've changed the frequency just in music. And I mean, you don't need to too much. All you need to do is listen to a bit of Mozart and a bit of pop music from last year, and you'll see there's been a little bit of a change. And that's something else we see is when you look at everything. You mentioned statues before, and the fact that we're not making them anymore. We see the art, that they used to make. We see the clothes they used to wear. We see the music they used to make with the orchestras and how intricate it was. We're devolving. We're told, oh no, we're the epitome. Oh, evolution. We're the highest point we've ever been. We're doing stuff that we can't comprehend a couple of hundred years ago. And how did they make those clothes they were wearing? Where are all these clothes factories? Because those, everyone will know what I say when I mean the clothes in the 1700s. Everyone knows what they look like, and they know that they're very different than what we get today.
Yeah, very much so.
And so this is how they live their life. Their whole lives were built on quality and beauty and art and things that last and things that meant something. And today, I mean, what do they call it today, right? The throwaway society. I mean, that's just there should show you how far we've fallen.
Yeah,
really. And it's all to do with, you know, this has been hidden, and it is all to do with, you know, they've changed the frequency because they don't want us, you know, on that frequency that we can interpret what was going on. Because everything that we experience is really frequency as well. So if they change the frequency we're on, then we can't necessarily comprehend what they were doing, because we're just, you know, we're out here and they're there, and that's why it's a completely different thing. And another massive part of this whole topic is star forts. And every city that you find an old world, every city you find an old world building in, I'm finding is or was a star city. And what a star city is basically a city from the old world surrounded by a big wall that is shaped like a star. They have these big points on them, you know, irregular shaped stars. They're not just 5-pointed, but yeah, they have all these big pointed walls. And in the middle of them, we find literal stars, the what we call the citadels. And they're literally, when you look at them from above, they just look like a 5-pointed star. Or, you know, we get 6-pointed, 7-pointed. And again, this is all frequency. These are all based on frequency. So as far as we can tell, they were matching the frequencies of their cities to the natural frequencies of the earth and ley lines, vortex points, things like that. And so it was all about harmony. It was all about harmonizing the energies, you know, so that everything was balanced, and that of course, you know, did away with like lack, you know, aggression, all this kind of thing, want, you know, jealousy, because everyone had what they wanted, and they were calm. And so, yeah, it's all got to do with frequency. When you see these, they're laid out, and they've all got water. All got canals going through them, canals going around the star shape. And it seems that they were moving the water and infusing frequency in it as well. Because if you know anything about water, back in the day, if you look into the Vedas and sort of Hinduism, they literally pray to their water, put it in copper jars, and they'll literally worship it for a few days before they drink it. And what they're doing is they're changing the structure, the actual harmonic structure, which is, again, the cymatic shape that we see.
Yeah. On that note, you've probably read the scientist Dr. Emoto, a Japanese guy, and in water and that stuff. So I'm right there with you. Yeah, it's more and more interesting how a lot of that stuff is coming out more and more, exposing what energies we're putting out. And especially when projecting it to water, and we are water mostly. So yeah, it's a huge point. Yeah, huge point.
Yeah. 70% water, brains are 90% water, and like I said, you can change the frequency, and that obviously changes everything else. So yeah, that's pretty much you know, the water in us is pretty much our frequency.
Yeah,
because if you dehydrate a human, you end up literally with a little pile of sand-looking stuff, you know, a few chemicals. The rest is pretty much water. So you just look out at what's going on with the water. You know, fluoride, pollution, running it through these dirty old pipes, you know, all this stuff, and they're messing with us. And if they're doing that, then they're clearly not out trying to make us healthy. So why would you believe it?
Exactly. And I'm also glad because I forgot to bring up because I've also looked at the Starfort thing a lot in your channel and others that talk about it too. And that is a whole fascinating another angle. You know?
That will blow. Yeah. If you haven't heard of Starforts, guys, just put Starfort into Google or your search engine, hit images, and prepare to have your mind blown. These things are all over the planet.
Yeah.
And they're ridiculous. They are just ridiculous. Yeah. Just go and have a look. and then the story that goes along with them is even more ridiculous. But it's interesting because, you know, star forts sort of came into the consciousness probably 6 or 7 years ago, but they're kind of like the Nazca lines. Unless you can see them from above, you don't know what they are. So we have all these old, you know, castles, you know, the old sort of king and castle that we're taught about, you know, English castle, rah, rah, rah. They're actually all star forts. When you look at them from above, they're actually all star forts.
Yes, and I've seen you demonstrate that
on
on your channel. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, fine. So yeah, I mean, all this stuff is just everywhere. It's hidden. So they can't hide it because it's everywhere. It's hidden in the information we're given. It's not talked about. They try and hide the information. But really, if you spend 5 minutes looking, like, this stuff is everywhere. It's like one of the first videos, I think it was the first video I did. The first video I ever did was on a star fort, and it's called Fort Jefferson. And it is off the coast of Florida. Literally, this thing is 200 miles out in the ocean, sitting on an atoll, and it's the largest red brick building in the United States. It's sitting in the middle of the ocean. It's just in the middle of the ocean. And the story is that they built it, the biggest red brick building in the United States. They built it for defense. Now, just think about that. Just think about that. This thing is in the middle of the ocean. It's in the middle of the ocean. What's it going to defend against? If someone comes along, they just sail around it.
Yeah.
They go, ha ha, your cannonball can't reach us, ha ha, and they sail around it.
Yeah.
So, and this is, I guess, you know, they've taught us not to question things, but as soon as you question a few things, you'll just think, hang on, how does that even make sense? And when you go into it further, the whole story of forts, that they were built for defense and they were built in wars, when you see these forts, these things are huge. And we're talking, these would take years and years and years to build. So what do? You say, hang on, guys, we're going to have a war. Okay, we're all going to stop for 5 years. Everyone go and build your fort. Then we'll come back and start a war. Because you can't build a fort in the middle of a war, can you?
No.
You cannot do it. And once they're built, they can only defend as far as you can shoot. Can't they?
Exactly.
So how effective is any fort? You know, especially for the amount of materials that go into them. Like, really, how effective? You'd be better off building a big, long wall than one of these huge forts.
True. You just need a barrier to kind of hide and be able to, you know, not that we all want to do that, but I mean, yeah, you just need something to screen you, and the rest is you need sight. Yeah. And most of the star fort stuff that I've seen you do is you get a lot of aerial footage, because sometimes you can't tell that it was a star fort till you get the aerial view and you can see the layout, and that's also super interesting, which in some of the episodes that I've seen, you discover them because you get to see the aerial and discover that this is an unknown star fort.
Yeah. I mean, I've done, obviously I've looked at a lot of cities, spent a lot of time on Google, and it just starts to pop out at you that there's certain, you know, elements that if you see them, now I'm at the point that I know if I see them, it's 100% it's a star city. I just know that now because I've seen so many. But it took a while. So there's this thing about canals. And pretty much most cities have what's called a river going through them. But most rivers, if they're like the Swan River in Perth, when you look at the edges of these rivers, they're man-made. These are not natural. These are man-made canals. These are canals. Okay, again, they've changed the word. These are canals. If you've got man-made edges, that's a canal. And so if you see a man-made canal going through a city, and you see a dome and you see a cathedral, that's a star city. At one point, that was a complete laid out star city, laid out where it should be to match the frequency with all the buildings. And yet they just are. But now half of them are buried, and people, the new society's gone in and just built over the top, knocked half it down. But it was Ontario, I think. Ontario, the wall's still there in the city. You can trace the wall of the star through the city. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. I've been there and I've never looked up.
I just found this big wall.
I'll have to look it up now. Now you got me interested.
Yeah. And when you start to it's just everywhere. Another point is funny shaped roads on angles that go into points. That means a star city. You see it everywhere. Yeah.
I'm just pulling something up here while everybody's looking at you here, and I'm where is it here now? Oh, I had this. It's disappeared, has it? Oh well, let's see what this shows here. There we go. So here's another perspective of that building. I just thought I'd give a quick look at I guess it's from the water or something. So we're looking at the other side. Somehow. Let me see. I'll play a little of this and see.
Just 1 second. I'm just going to shut my door.
Yeah, you bet.
Alrighty.
Yeah, it's just playing through a few little clips. I just thought I'd let this little video play and you can get a little closer pick. I don't know who this guy is. If he's the builder or what.
Probably the architect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just another perspective of the building there. But what was I going to ask you?
Big.
Yeah, like you say, there's another one on the back. There's probably one. Sorry, Cam.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. It's always that. It's always that four around the outside and one in the middle, which we're kind of relating to, like, the four corners of the world, the four angels, and the four winds. There's all these old stories of 4 points of the world, and then Mount Mewe. If you look into old, have you heard of Mount Mewe? Mount Mewe is supposed to be a magnetic mountain at the center of the Earth.
Okay,
so
yes, I've
heard
something.
It's mirroring.
Well, there's the floor there.
Yeah. So I see that geometric pattern. Just there.
Yeah, I just thought I'd pause it for a second.
Just go back a little bit.
Go back a bit here. Okay. There's this.
Yeah, so that's the dome, and you'll see what's underneath it is that. So see, underneath the dome, there's always these geometric patterns in circles.
What is this here? Is it's this directly underneath the dome?
That's directly under the dome, yep. And see that star in the middle? What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pointed star. And then you'll probably find there's 8 sections. Is there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Oh no, it's 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it's 10. But that's all basically geometry and frequency, and we're not.
It's actually 8.
I don't know.
1, 2,
maybe people
3, 4, 5, 6.
It is 8.
8. Yep. There's 8.
That would make sense. Oh, good. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yep.
That makes sense. 8 pointed star, and then that's what you see as well is, everything matches. That's why I said when I counted the star, I said it's probably 8 segments, because it's always, that's how you find things. If it was a 6 pointed star, it would have 6 segments.
And that's something I forgot, Campbell. That's something I learned from watching your channel about the star fort stuff. So and repointing it out here, seeing it in this context as opposed to looking to the old whatever construction it was out in the middle of the field and all that. Yeah, this is very, very interesting.
So that would be to do with like the resonance of the earth energy where that particular building is. So if you found the actual star citadel for that city, it would probably be an 8 pointed star.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, this is in Victoria somewhere. Then there's remnants of a star fort, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
I'll let this play a little more, see what they show, and then
I might have to to get onto Google and have a look now.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty interesting.
But, yeah, like, that's nice, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, they're showing this
and
part
very
again.
familiar shapes.
Where was it? That was nice. There,
always have that kind of.
Yeah, that's pretty stunning, like work there.
Okay, and again, see if you look at that circle, see the blue lines inside it.
Mm-hmm.
Inside that circle, you've got 8, and see around the outside those leaf things. There's 8 of them, and then see on the outside those triangles. There'll be 8 of them as well. So it's all frequency, fractal geometry numbers.
So are they trying to use all this? Is this purely designed for power coming into the structure, or what further the electrical conductivity, or what is this amplifying?
This is, most of them seem to be made of tile, like ceramics, and most ceramics are insulators. The domes aren't. So so I don't think that there'd be energy coming out of it. It's like an insulator. This is what we're still going to work out is we don't know how it worked, but as far as the pattern, it's definitely tuning into the earth energies. So being an insulator, it's probably keeping the energy, under the floor, I guess, underneath that.
Would it have a collection?
You find it on some
collection tanks
Yeah, well, as far as we can tell, they were like wells, big holes and big tanks underground with water in them. That's as far as we can tell. That's where they were storing it. But it looks like it was just there was free energy flowing in the buildings that you could just tap into at any time because it's not like there's an on-off switch. So you don't have to pay for it or anything. So it's there, and you have a device to pick it up. I've actually, there's these things called monstrums, and what they are is they're so-called religious artifacts, and they're these little metal things. I don't know what you call them, but what they look like is miniature versions of cathedrals. With spires, with all the bits that we would call antiquitech on them, but they're handheld.
Correct, yep.
So they may have been the kind of device that you would use to actually, get the energy from the building into a device, like your PowerPoint kind of thing.
Yes, correct, yeah.
Because they're literally... Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's my fault. I keep talking over you because the way the delay goes sometime, and I apologize for that. I'll get used to it over time. Where's this thing? I've got to pull something up here for you to. Oh, here we go. Now here, okay. I don't know. Did I pull this up earlier? Yes, I'm going over it again if I did. But
no.
Here's the picture.
Log.
Where'd it go? Well, okay, that's not a very good picture. We'll go back just a second. But anyways, so Campbell, this is what it looked like when they were doing all that construction of the British Columbia Legislature building. This is some of the scenes.
Oh, nice.
Around the same time. Well, some of these ones here are on the mainland. Now, this is a little newer. They've injected that. But here, this is around the same time. They're building this in Vancouver, but they're building that other thing over on the island.
It's just, the amount of photos I've seen, like, that have got all the old world buildings, and literally next to them you see like a little wooden shack, and it's just like, okay, the shack is what they could actually build, but they put it next to this huge building. So no, we built the building as well.
Yeah.
But and it also looks like it's all wood, right? That's what they're cutting down, and that's a lot of wood. It's a big tree. Why aren't they using the wood to build things?
Well, you would think so. It seemed like the natural thing for people to be doing. So where did, like you say, you point out so obviously, and most people, dare I say, the common sense factor, if you look and you read, and it's going to make you go, it's going to open your eyes and go, something doesn't make sense here, because you look at this fact, you look at this fact, and you start adding them all up together, whether it's the construction or where they are, where the building is, what it looks like around, what their housing is. And you start going, something's wrong here.
Yeah, definitely. When I did that, I think I've done a couple of videos on the Crystal Palace, so it's in one of them. But I looked into glass manufacturing, because that building was literally 95% glass, and it was built in 1851. But in 1851, if you look into glass making, they couldn't make panels that were the size of the panels they tell us were in the Crystal Palace. They literally could not produce the materials that were in the building.
I watched that full episode.
They were still hand producing glass, and just little bits that were not not flat, so they weren't really see-through. And the Crystal Palace is full of these huge panels of perfectly made glass. So, I mean, they stuffed up the story a bit when they did it. Someone got the date wrong for glass manufacturing.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? I've got it here. Let's see if I can pull this other one up here. It's just an interesting tab of a street, because you've showed pictures like this, and it's odd. I mean, in some ways it makes sense, but let's pull this up. So here we are, and this is a main street in Vancouver in 1954. Okay, and that's only 60, 70 years after they supposedly built the legislature building on the island. And this is remnants, as they declare, in 1954 of ripping up the streetcar. Now, why in that day and age would you be ripping up the streetcar stuff? Because there was barely enough people having cars, and there wasn't really buses yet. And it just makes me go, what's going on here?
Yeah, well, exactly. The story with, streetcars, basically that any city, it's the same thing. Any city you look into that's an old world city, you'll find that they used to have streetcars. The story we get is that the Rockefellers, JD and his oil, went around and bought up all these, owned by the people companies for the electric trams, and then ripped them all out so he could put petrol buses in. Now, bit of a weird, I mean, why would you do that when you had all the infrastructure, and all you would need to do is increase the fares a little bit, and you've got a ready-made business? But he went in and ripped it all out, ripped out everything he paid for and destroyed it. And then on top of that, he had to pay to get all these buses in there that people could pay, just like they pay on the tram. So you've got to ask yourself, why did they rip them out? What was so scary about the tram systems? And when you look back into them, it seems that they were free energy, that they were running on free energy. So again, is this just a way that they've got rid of the past? Then that's why it's been done, because obviously we know money's a big thing, and they're going to do whatever they can for money. But when he's, like I said, when all he had to do was charge more fare on the train, he would have made his money anyway. Why would you rip up the whole system out? It doesn't make a lot of sense unless you're trying to hide something, cover something up.
Exactly. And that's what I've discovered through you and your channel, and others doing the same on this kind of subject matter. And it is just mind-blowing when you start to look at why they would start to do certain things when you can sit back and look at it logically. And then, of course, you, Campbell, you provide so much evidence through your research, and like you say, you can look and you know instantly in a lot of cases. Actually, on a moment, I have one of my favorite episodes in a fun sense that you did was talking about I think it was Seattle or somewhere around there, and they held up the whole block. They lifted the whole block up or something.
Oh yeah.
And they're standing there, and you had the pictures, and they're drawing, and they're showing like all these citizens holding up this whole city block of buildings. And jacks. I mean, are you kidding me? And you expose it so great, and well, you were laughing as well, and so it was quite an interesting one, and I had a lot of laughs with you watching it as you went through it.
Yeah, sometimes the stories are just so ridiculous, you've just got to laugh. But that story, that was a solid brick building. I think it was 6 or 7 stories tall, and this was they literally got jacks. And this is back in the 1800s, so manual jacks underneath this building somehow, and they all jacked it up. And then they just had enough people that they could pick it up and walk down the road with it. So, I mean, it's like, yeah, it's almost like they're trying to test us to see how silly we are sometimes, see what we'll believe.
Oh, I agree with you there. I think, especially in these times, as you know, when you witness what's going on, I try not to watch the mainstream media as little as possible, but you still know what's going on. And here, I don't need to watch their stuff to see. But yeah, we're in a funny time, and things are becoming more and more obvious of what's true, what's not true, and everything you're doing is another extension of that. Well, you have many people who have discovered that on your channel, and there'll be many more, I'm sure, as time goes by. And it's incredible that this could have been, humanity had the wool pulled over their eyes somehow. And I've heard different things about that. And, we haven't dived too much into the mud flood thing, but, where there's that part in human history of the Dark Ages, do you think that's possibly when this all happened? And then there's this sort of forcible geographical and whatever, God's will, maybe mud, and whatever happened that we don't quite know whether it was the whole flood, but that would mean it's way more recent than what we know. So with that factor, how you elaborate on that.
Definitely big problems with time. So it looks like the Middle Ages never existed. So what we find is we've got maps, we've got coins, we've got art, paintings, furniture, and what we find is the number 1. So if they've written 1750, instead of a 1 in front of it, it's got an I or a J, and this stands for Iusa or Jesus. So it's basically in the year of our Lord 750. And what happened, Joseph Scaliger, of course he was a Jesuit, he rewrote the histories. He basically did the interpretations, all the what's the word, I'll remember it. But yeah, he rewrote all the books from Latin into German or whatever into Italian. And of course when he did that, he changed a lot of stuff. And what happened is they changed all these J's and I's to 1s. And when they did that, they added 1,000 years to they took away 1,000 years from the timeline. Added. So they added in all this time that never existed. Am I saying that correctly? God. So
yeah, I think so, yes.
Which was actually 750, and they've turned it into the year 1750. So they've added this amount of time, which we call the Dark Ages. Now, if you look into the Dark Ages, you'll find that pretty much nothing happened. And the reason is because nothing happened, because it never existed. And what they do is they push, with history, they love to push things back into the past, because the more time they can give themselves, the more story they can put in there, the more they can explain things away, if you know what I mean. The further you can, it's like with, old buildings. If they're 5,000 years old, then you've got all this time that you can build this big story up in. If they're 500 years old, you've got less time. So by adding 1,000 years, they can say, oh no, all this stuff happened. It was all so long ago. But we're finding that it was a lot closer than we're told. The mud flood or inundation or whatever it was, there's still, the jury's still out on whether that is what we know as Noah's flood.
Yes. Yep.
But what we're looking at is the age of discovery, or the age of rediscovery, as it really was. Sort of, late 1400s, 1500s. They were discovering buildings already buried. So that means we're putting the mud flood before that. So probably, in our chronology with the one in there, we're probably talking around the year 1000 to the year sort of 1200.
Yep.
So not that long ago, really.
Well,
Definitely
that's what it seems like.
And so it all seems a lot closer. And the stuff we're finding out, it's just getting pretty
crazy,
ridiculous, because we're finding a lot of old books, from the 1500s, the 1400s, maps, and they just give a completely different story, completely different look at the world than what we see now. So I'll sort of leave it there, because then we'll get lost in conversation. But it's just such a big topic, because pretty much everything we look at seems to have been inverted. They love to switch things 180 degrees. Instead of telling us, where were they? Instead of being a magnificent, culture that could build all this wonderful stuff and had free energy, no, you were just cavemen living in the mud. So the trick is not to believe their story. Think for yourself.
Very, very true. Well, that's what your whole channel and philosophy is kind of about. And I think, well, I've covered everything I want to today, although I do have a couple questions before we go, and I'll try not to keep you too long, as these are viewers' questions that they wanted me to ask you. What is your and you don't have to go too deep into this, because we could go on and on about this when you hear what it is. What are your thoughts on flat Earth and the concentric model? Like, what are your feelings about that in because of your research in this field?
Looks flat. Pretty much everything we find from the past, the further you go back, the maps get flat. And then, of course, you've heard of Agartha and places like this, and Mount Mewe, as I mentioned before, which is in land mass basically around the North Pole. And we're told that that's just water today. But we have maps, and many, many maps, that show there was 4 distinct land masses around a mountain that was called Mount Mewe. And this is spoken about in ancient texts, ancient theosophies, everywhere. So looking into that, it looks like there was land there. When we look at the other end, we've got maps that show that there was a lot more land out at the the other end, Antarctica. And it's never been shown on an old map as what we see now as this continent. I also did a video not long ago called Google Earth Anomalies, and I actually show the South Pole, and I show how they've cut and folded the picture in.
Oh, I think I've seen some of that episode, and I'm not sure if I got to the end of it, because I've been busy with trying to ramp this up and now meet you, which I appreciate. You went into quite a dive on that, and I'm trying to remember everything you went through, and I'm sorry to interrupt you on that, just reminded me.
Yeah. So and this is the other thing, if we're living on a globe and we've got Google Earth, why isn't it an accurate representation of the Earth? why is so much of it blurred out? And a lot of people may not notice this, but because I look and I go right down and looking all the time, so much is blurred out. Under the ocean, you'll see bits that you can see, and then there'll just be this big blurred bit next to it. And we're told that this all comes from satellites. But if you go to like a city like New York, you can turn right down and see someone's number plate. Go to Africa, and suddenly you can't see anything. Now, if they're all coming from satellites, all these images, all from the same distance, you know, from the Earth, why don't we get the same picture? You know, why don't we get the same, you know, quality of picture? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And when you start to look into this and you just see what's been covered up and the people who have covered it up and what's happened, there's a lot of questions. And just as one more bit on that, all the maps are flat until you hit about 1400s, 1450s to 1500s. Suddenly all these globes come in everywhere, and not just in maps. The maps turn into squares, globes start appearing, you know, there's globes, you know, in pictures everywhere. Just this whole narrative, you know, that's also around the time of obviously, you know, Copernicus and all these types of things, Galileo, and it's just this massive big change. When you look at it, it looks like a change. This was the world, and then there's this 100-year period, and you come out of that period and it's a completely different world. And suddenly it's a ball shooting through space, which it wasn't beforehand.
Very interesting. No, that's wonderful.
I don't think it's
covered. Yeah. Sorry, I keep.
I was just going to say, I'm not 100% sure what it is. I'm not 100% sure what it is. I'm getting more and more certain that there's more land. But yeah, what I do know is the model they show us doesn't make sense. You know, it's like they say, why isn't there a camera on the moon focused on it?
Yeah, exactly. So, and then the other question was, Campbell, James Webb, the Space Telescope, Hubble, and, you know, because somebody for some reason had this question, you know, what he knows, what he thinks, and this cost and this stuff that's being put out in the media. Do you know anything about that or any opinion about that?
What was that for like all this space exploration?
Well, they were referring specifically to James Webb and the Space Telescope, the Hubble or whatever, and then they're talking about, because something's been in the news about the cost, and what do you think he knows? Is this a ruse? Are we being played, kind of thing?
Yeah, you're being played. So if you think about how, I mean, most people won't know the figure, but NASA, which of course was started by scientists taken from the Nazi Party, NASA's budget every year is billions and billions and billions of dollars. Now, what do you think the American taxpayer gets for that money, gets for that investment? But they're not even seeing stuff up in space anymore. Where's all that money going? Okay, so this is the question. When they say, oh, look, space, the final frontier, we need all this money so that we can benefit you and we can get out and build these future in space. But we've got nothing for it. They went to the moon, apparently. They never went back after their Apollo 13. NASA today will tell you, NASA will, it's in their literature. They say we can't go to the moon because of the Van Allen belts. They can't get through. That's in today. They forget that they said they went to the moon and then they lost all, what was it, 3,000 hours of tape.
I know.
Of all this, you know, lunar footage and all the stuff. Oh, it's all gone. Sorry, we lost it. So they can't even prove they were first time. They say, now they're saying they never went. And this is how they change history. You know, it's like Goebbels said, you say something long enough and people just start to believe it. So if they keep saying we never went to the moon, in generation, will anyone ever even think or remember that we once thought we went to the moon? Because it's winding down. I mean, now they talk about Mars, but why do they talk about Mars? because it's more expensive to get to Mars than it is to get to the moon. It's further away, right? We need more money. We need more money. I mean, all that we've really seen is, Elon Musk, and he funds himself. He threw up a ton of satellites, probably for 5G, who knows? But he could get that done. But NASA, with their billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, they can't go to the moon and put a camera on it and point it at the Earth for $500 billion. So same story.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, yeah, go ahead.
You're looking at the price of telescopes, and you looking at the price of lenses when they get big telescopes. And these lenses, they're worth like tens and tens of millions of dollars. That's just for the lens. So they say. But if there's nothing out there, what are they looking at? Where's all the data? What are they learning? How's it benefiting man? What's all this about? If they're getting all this money, we shouldn't we know all this new information that benefits us, that we can use to have better lives?
Yeah, 100% right. 100%. Exactly correct. Yeah. Well, Campbell,
if you really see something funny,
go ahead.
Oh, just last thing, go and Google. If you really want to see something funny, go to YouTube and search for the interview with the astronauts, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, just after they got back from the moon. That is the strangest bit of video footage you will ever see. It's just go and watch it, because you can imagine the first 3 people to ever step on the moon, they should be the most excited people, the heroes of the world. We just conquered everything. We've been where no man's been before. Go and watch that clip.
I've watched it. I've watched it, and I know exactly what you mean. And it's like, why aren't they on top of the world? They just landed from the moon. They look all somber, like they're standing there lying. Yeah, and they're very, very annoyed. They have to lie. You can see that they don't want to be lying. And Neil Armstrong, pretty much after that, he just disappeared. Didn't want to talk about it ever. Didn't give any interviews. Didn't hear boo from him, and now he's gone. First man on the moon. Yeah. Never wanted to talk about it ever. Yeah. That doesn't even make sense, right? That doesn't make sense as in a common sense, rational mind. But
even if he got there and he had a bad experience, that's a good living. He doesn't have to work for the rest of his life. Good living, gets a few ghostwriters, writes some books, does a few interviews. He's set. But no, didn't even do that. He just disappeared. Bar of it.
No, exactly. He made the best of it, that's for sure. But Campbell, I've kept you longer. Well, I thought we'd go long, and I so appreciate you getting together with me. And I hope you'll come back at some point. Talk about something else.
Definitely, that's been fun.
And also, so there was viewers will, I'm sure, have some other questions for you, and hopefully everybody out there, you enjoyed Campbell's review of the BC legislatures, and we'll look at some other buildings, and do something in the future and talk about what we might discover or do a dive on something that Campbell's already done on his channel. I don't know, but Campbell, absolute pleasure speaking with you and coordinating with you on this, and I can't wait to do it again, honestly.
No worries at all, mate. Thank you very much for having me on, and happy to come back and answer a few more questions from your viewers for sure.
Yeah, you bet, Campbell. Just hang on for a second while I close off the show, and then I'll talk to you before you're gone there. So thanks again, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. This is the longest episode on the channel, as you'll know, and it's a wonderful thing having Campbell on and being able to discuss this topic in detail and about the BC legislature. So I look forward to your comments about it. Go visit Campbell over on Autodidactic channel, and you can see his backup channels. And we look forward to having him back. And I look forward to your comments and your discussions, the questions to me to ask him the next time. So that's all for today, folks. Enjoy the episode and we'll see you in at the upcoming rallies that are coming up. And for now, the Mad Watcher, and I'm out.